baby to some real use.
Get a load of him. Where do they keep getting these guys?
Big Red 1 is absolutely fantastic. I remember seeing this on store shelves and not even being jealous since I had the actual Call of Duty 2, and I thought this was just a cheap console knockoff. But I couldn't have been more wrong. So what do you do when there's a new generation of consoles right around the block, but the current one contains the best-selling console of all time? Do you focus on Xbox 360 only, or stay on PlayStation 2 a while longer? Activision was like, why not both? In some sense, Big Red 1 could be one of the most important Call of Duty games in retrospect. After all, it was the first game by Treyarch, which today is considered by many to be the best Call of Duty developer. Now when we think of their breakout hits, it's usually World at War or Black Ops, but what if I told you that these guys developed a banger of a game right off the bat?
Man, I'm starving. Haven't eaten nothing since we left the ship. Hey, you know, my dad runs a deli back in the Bronx, makes the best pastrami sandwiches you'll ever eat.
Brooklyn, you ain't quite right.
Kinda like your sister, huh, you friggin' hayseed?
Candy!
As soon as you pick up the controller, you'll realize that this is a vastly different game than the main Call of Duty 2. For starters, the game's story is entirely focused on the Big Red 1, which is a moniker for the American 1st Infantry Division. There's no Soviet nor British campaigns here, which actually I didn't really even miss. The gameplay is much more fluid and tight than the previous console Call of Duty game, Finest Hour. Treyarch would use their own engine, which was a modified Quake engine as opposed to renderware used in Finest Hour, so it gives the game a more familiar feel. And as this was pretty much towards the end of the PlayStation 2 life cycle, the game's graphics are downright gorgeous. It perfectly utilizes all of PlayStation 2's horsepower and combines it with great lighting, particle effects and textures to create a fantastic stylized art style that looks good even today. There's a lot going on here, more explosions, more set pieces, even more than some parts of its big brother, Call of Duty 2. The game's atmosphere and graphics fidelity is unmatched.
Ain't gonna make it!
What'd you expect? A battleship? Keep paddling!
And despite sharing the same title, in some ways it's more similar to Call of Duty 1 and United Offensive than Call of Duty 2. For starters, the HUD shares many of the same icons and elements as Call of Duty 1. There's also a health bar and health pickups, unlike the regenerating health in Call of Duty 2. And I really like the fact that there's no regenerating health here. That was one of my main criticisms for Call of Duty 2. Apart from that, this game is quite different than the main games. The level design here is much more linear and the paths are more narrow, as it seems the game tries to guide you towards the next set piece or cutscenes, more akin to modern Call of Duty games than the classics. Allied, non-playable characters are present with you at all times throughout the campaign, and there's no stealth or special ops sections in this campaign. It's all big battle after big battle, and it's thrilling from start almost to finish. Some final parts of the game break the pacing a bit, but we'll get to those later in the video.
Huck said the Germans are retreating! That's why the brass ordered another push! He said that the last 5 times we've gone in.
Yeah? Well, if it wasn't for Hawk, he wouldn't have made it out of Africa alive. Clam up and enjoy the ride.
Brooklyn's right! Huck's always had our back! Ain't no reason to doubt him now! I wasn't saying that Hawk was... Everyone off the tank!
Big Red 1 is much more character focused than any other Call of Duty game at the time. Throughout the entire campaign, you're accompanied by a squad of US soldiers, all with distinct voice acting and personalities. Most of the voiceover is done by actors from Band of Brothers, so if you're a fan of the series, I'm sure you'll find some recognizable voices. There's no multi-dimensional character building here or any groundbreaking stuff really, but the game still tells a somewhat heartbreaking war story, and for some reason, Big Red 1 evokes strong feelings of respect and also pity and sorrow for the men that fought in these bloody battles. This is something that Call of Duty 1 and 2 and even the later installments failed to do with me. I attribute this to the fact that the entire game is focused on just one squad and a handful of characters that I've grown to like a lot in my 5-hour playthrough.
How come everyone's always counting on us, Sarge?
Because we're the infantry, Corporal, and God loves the infantry!
There are 3 big theaters of war in Big Red 1. After an epic prologue mission in France, you're transported 2 years back to Algeria, where you participate in the Battle of Oran. What stuck out the most to me here is that you're fighting the Vichy French. This was a bit unexpected for a Call of Duty game, but was very interesting. You'll see some French weapons here that you don't really see in World War II video games. After that, it's time to head to Tunisia for the first tank mission of the game. You're driving a cute little M3 Stuart tank, which was surprisingly very fun. What I liked about this is the fact that the game lets you drive in third-person mode, unlike the first-person only mode in Call of Duty 1 and 2. The controls are very nice, the tank is fast and agile, and while the objectives here aren't really all that interesting, the level doesn't drag on, and soon you're back to boots on the ground. The next missions are Kazarine Pass and the village of Kazarine. The desert looks very nice, along with the adobe villages. I enjoy the African campaign here quite a lot. It's very eventful, with a lot of cutscenes and dialogue. And next up is a section that's similar to a level in United Offensive, where you take the role of a gunner in a B-24 Liberator. It plays very similarly and was a nice change of pace. This is where the African campaign ends, and we're transported to the beach of Sicily as part of Operation Husky. The beach landing here was visceral. Even though Big Red 1 has this stylized and a bit cartoony art style, like even the animations are very fast and have very few frames, so they have this stop motion feel to them, the game still manages to deliver the horrors of war. Having seen these guys go through hell in Africa, and then instead of going home, they're just sent here to charge these beaches, it's haunting.
Thank you, boys. We can take it from here. I'm starting to see why the Big Red 1 has a reputation.
Thank you, sir.
There's a lot of set pieces, but they're not so over the top as in modern Call of Duty. Instead of just selling the action movie spectacle, the set pieces here are for actual drama purposes. This campaign arc follows the squad's efforts through Sicily, is the shortest part of the game but still very enjoyable. This is also where the game starts exploring with a darker tone. A lot of your squad mates died throughout the course of Big Red 1, which surprised me a bit. The game starts off with a lot of funny and quippy dialogue. These guys are cracking jokes all the time. But as the game progresses, their jokes become less and less frequent, and you can feel the fatigue and exhaustion of everyone. The game's main menu is very military propaganda inspired. The heroic graphics and music, along with this triumphant narration during these short documentaries between the missions, is in stark contrast to the game's story and characters in the later parts of the game. I do not know if this was the intended atmosphere, or just so happened without too much thought. I may be looking too much into this, but I hope it's true, because the game produces a very unique experience, unlike any Call of Duty game up until this point.
What do you think that's all about, Sarge?
Well, I heard Delaney talking to General Gordon about a big offensive at the Siegfried Line. I think they're sending us in first.
Birkeland says the U.S. Army consists of the Big Red 1 and 10 million replacements.
I'm beginning to think Army brass agrees, Schmitty.
After Italy, it's time for Omaha Beach. This time very different than its contemporaries. It's a bit different than Medal of Honor Allied Assaults or Frontlines D-Day. It's also not as spectacular as Pointe du Hoc in Call of Duty 2, but it's still an enjoyable mission that shows a different part of the beach landings than most of the games of that era. The next mission takes place in the Normandy countryside and shows off the beautiful visuals and art direction. This is the part where I get a bit critical of Big Red 1, the game, not the Division. For starters, there's not a lot of soundtrack throughout the game. If you've seen my previous videos, I really appreciate when the game's soundtrack is present throughout the gameplay. I think it's one of the most important pieces of the puzzle, and when it's done correctly, the player can sometimes barely even notice it. But when the music is lacking or non-existent, it's quite apparent. Think of World at War or the original Modern Warfare 2. Even if we go outside the Call of Duty bubble, games like Uncharted, Assassin's Creed 2, Skyrim, The Witcher 3, those games feel and atmosphere is defined by their unique and recognizable soundtracks. What little music there is in Big Red 1 is quite good, but unfortunately for most of the missions you'll only hear gunfire and explosions. The final parts of the game are a bit tedious. Something may have happened in the third to last mission, where the final 3 chapters felt a bit rushed. The levels are even more constrained, the objectives are a bit too hashed out, and there's not a lot of dialogue anymore. I do wonder if this was intended though, as at this point most of your original squad is either dead or wounded, and those few who remain are dire to go home and the war to be over. Like I said before, it's a powerful experience, but ultimately not as fun as the levels in the earlier parts of the game. The final mission is very unremarkable. There's no video gamey gauntlet to test all your skills or anything like that. It's a pretty straightforward level and nothing spectacular. It has some moments that hit you in the guts, but from a gameplay perspective this is just on another level. This may have been by design though. Like I said previously, the game's tone shifts and goes to a darker side as the game progresses, but it didn't diminish my enjoyment of the game at all though, and I was still impressed with the game once the credits started rolling.
Wait for it. Now! On your feet, gentlemen. There's our armor! Smitty, we did it!
Big Red 1 was outstanding. Comparing it to all the other Call of Duty games released up until this point, this one had the most concise direction. It felt like a game with its design executed to the fullest, and even though I had some issues with the last parts of the game, I can't figure out if the last few missions were rushed or was that the intended experience. Following Big Red 1's success, Activision would let Treyarch develop a mainline entry in the franchise for the launch of PlayStation 3, as Infinity Ward went on to experiment with a modern day setting. If you're wondering how Call of Duty 3 came out, I have a video retrospective on my channel, so check that out. Looking back on Call of Duty 3 now, that game actually felt like a sequel to Big Red 1 rather than the other mainline games. I have now reviewed every classic Call of Duty game, and if I had to pick my favorite, I'd probably go with United Offensive, but Big Red 1 would definitely be near the top. There's just something about the PC movement and gunplay though that aged much better than these old PlayStation 2 first-person shooters. Still, big respect to Treyarch. Their first Call of Duty game was great and unique and really stands out among the classic Call of Duty. I applaud the decision to stick with just one story and one set of characters, as it made the events that unfold throughout the campaign much more impactful. And also, the atmosphere and set pieces were unmatched at this point, as well as the overall direction and cohesion of the game. Thank you for watching. We beat Big Red 1 on stream and had a ton of fun. Come join us next time and let me know in the comments below which old school video game you'd like for me to cover next. Hit the bell so you know when I go live or publish the next review. In the meantime, feel free to check out my other videos. See you soon.